You're walking down a sterile hospital corridor at 2 a.m. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting eerie shadows on the white walls. Behind one of these doors lies a man who has taken 17 lives. And you're the only person he trusts enough to tell where the other bodies are hidden. This isn't just another story about mental health care or criminal psychology. This is about a psychiatric nurse who formed the most dangerous therapeutic relationship in medical history. Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about evil, trust, and the thin line between helping and enabling. Before we dive deep into this incredible story, hit that like button if stories about the human psyche fascinate you. Subscribe for more true crime content that will keep you awake at night, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin with Sarah Chen, the psychiatric nurse who thought she could heal anyone. Sarah had been working at Millbrook Secure Psychiatric Hospital for 12 years. At 34, she was considered one of the most skilled psychiatric nurses in the facility. Her colleagues respected her because she could calm the most agitated patients, establish rapport with the most withdrawn individuals, and maintain professional boundaries even in the most challenging circumstances. But Sarah was different from other psychiatric nurses. Where others saw dangerous criminals who needed to be managed and medicated, Sarah saw broken human beings who deserved a chance at healing. She believed, perhaps naively, that every person had the capacity for redemption if someone just took the time to understand them. Millbrook wasn't your typical psychiatric facility. This was where the state sent the criminally insane, the individuals who had committed horrific crimes but were deemed mentally unfit to stand trial or serve regular prison sentences. The patients here weren't just dealing with depression or anxiety. These were people who had murdered, tortured, and destroyed lives while their minds were fractured by severe mental illness. Sarah's shift started every evening at 6 p.m. She would walk through the security checkpoints, past the reinforced glass windows and locked doors, into a world where reality and delusion often blended together. Her patients included a former surgeon who believed he was performing life-saving operations when he mutilated victims, a mother who had drowned her 3 children because voices told her they were possessed, and a teenager who had set fire to a nursing home because he thought the elderly residents were actually demons. But it was on a cold Tuesday evening in October when Sarah first encountered the patient who would change everything. His name was Marcus Webb, and his file made even the most experienced staff members uncomfortable. Marcus had been convicted of killing 4 people over a span of 2 years, but investigators suspected the actual number was much higher. He was methodical, intelligent, and completely devoid of empathy. What made his case particularly disturbing was that he had never shown any signs of traditional mental illness. No voices, no delusions, no psychotic breaks. Marcus killed because he enjoyed it, and he was very good at hiding his activities. He had been transferred to Millbrook after a series of psychological evaluations, determined that he suffered from severe antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features. The courts had decided that life in a secure psychiatric facility was more appropriate than death row, though many questioned whether Marcus was truly mentally ill or simply evil. When Sarah first saw Marcus, she was struck by how ordinary he appeared. He was 38 years old, of average height and build, with brown hair and unremarkable features. He could have been anyone: your neighbor, your co-worker, the person standing behind you in line at the grocery store. There was nothing in his appearance that suggested the monster that lurked beneath the surface. Sarah had been assigned to Marcus's care team, along with Dr. Patricia Reeves, the hospital's head psychiatrist, and 2 other nurses. Their job was to monitor his behavior, administer medications, and attempt to engage him in therapeutic activities. Most of the staff believed this was a waste of time. Marcus had been at Millbrook for 3 years, and in that time he had barely spoken to anyone. He was polite when addressed directly, following rules and routines without complaint. But he never initiated conversation, never participated in group therapy sessions, and showed no interest in the various programs designed to help patients process their crimes and work toward rehabilitation. He was like a ghost, present but not really there, going through the motions of existence without any apparent inner life. Sarah's first direct interaction with Marcus came during her second week on his unit. She was distributing evening medications when she noticed him sitting alone in the common area, staring out the window at the parking lot below. Most patients avoided the windows, finding the view of the outside world too painful a reminder of their lost freedom. But Marcus seemed fascinated by something only he could see. "Mr. Webb," Sarah said softly, approaching his table with his medication cup. "It's time for your evening dose." Marcus turned to look at her, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. His eyes were pale blue, almost grey, and there was an intelligence behind them that was both captivating and unsettling. He didn't look at her the way other patients did, with desperation or confusion or anger. He looked at her as if he was seeing her, really seeing her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Thank you, Nurse Chen," he said, his voice calm and measured. He took the medication cup and swallowed the pills without water, never breaking eye contact. "You're new to this unit." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the uncomfortable feeling that Marcus was studying her like a specimen under a microscope. "I am. I've been working at Millbrook for 12 years, but this is my first time on the maximum security ward." Marcus smiled, and Sarah immediately wished he hadn't. There was something wrong with his smile, something that didn't reach his eyes and made her think of a predator showing its teeth. "How do you like it so far?" he asked, as if they were making casual conversation at a coffee shop instead of a secure psychiatric facility. "It's challenging," Sarah replied honestly. "But I believe everyone deserves compassionate care, regardless of their circumstances." Something flickered across Marcus's face at those words. It was so brief that Sarah almost missed it, but for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression seemed to crack, revealing something raw and hungry underneath. "Compassionate care," he repeated, as if testing the words. "How refreshing. Most of the staff here see us as animals to be fed and watered until we die." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew she should end this conversation, return to her rounds, maintain the professional distance that was so crucial when working with dangerous patients. But something about Marcus's words, the hint of vulnerability beneath his cold exterior, made her pause. "I don't see animals," she said quietly. "I see people who are hurting." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face as if looking for signs of deception. Finally he nodded slowly. "You might be the first person to say that, and actually mean it," he said. "Be careful, Nurse Chen. Compassion can be dangerous in a place like this." As Sarah walked away from that encounter, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. She had worked with hundreds of patients over the years, from the merely troubled to the genuinely dangerous. But none of them had ever made her feel the way Marcus did. It wasn't fear exactly, though there was certainly an element of that. It was more like recognition, as if some part of her had connected with some part of him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to Marcus than she should have. She noticed that he never received visitors, never got phone calls, never received mail. While other patients had photos of family members or artwork from children taped to their walls, Marcus's room was completely bare, except for the standard institutional furniture. She observed his routines, how he woke up at exactly the same time every morning, how he ate his meals in precise measured bites, how he spent hours in the library reading psychology textbooks and case studies. There was something almost mechanical about his behavior, as if he was going through a carefully programmed set of actions rather than living spontaneously. But it was during the night shifts that Sarah began to see glimpses of something different. When the unit was quiet and most patients were sleeping, Marcus would often be awake, standing at his window or sitting at the small desk in his room, writing in a notebook that he kept hidden from the staff. Sarah knew she wasn't supposed to engage with patients outside of official therapeutic interactions. The rules were clear about maintaining boundaries, especially with patients like Marcus, who had been classified as manipulative and potentially dangerous. But her curiosity and her genuine desire to help began to override her professional caution. It started with small things. Sarah would linger a moment longer when giving Marcus his medications, asking how he was feeling or if he needed anything. She began to notice patterns in his behavior, subtle changes in his mood that seemed to correspond with external events. When there was a thunderstorm, Marcus became more agitated. When new patients were admitted to the unit, he would withdraw even further into himself. 3 months into her assignment on Marcus's unit, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was working a double shift, covering for a colleague who had called in sick, when she found Marcus in the common area at 2 a.m., staring out the window with an expression of such profound sadness that it took her breath away. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. Marcus looked at her with surprise. In all his time at Millbrook, no staff member had ever sat down with him during off hours, never engaged with him as if he were a real person rather than a case file. "Sleep is overrated," he replied, but his usual controlled tone had softened slightly. "I do my best thinking at night." "What do you think about?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words sent a chill through her body. "I think about the ones who were never found," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think about the families who still don't know what happened to their loved ones. I think about the secrets I'll take to my grave." Sarah's heart began to pound. She knew she was venturing into dangerous territory, but she couldn't stop herself from asking the question that would change both of their lives forever. How many were there really? Marcus. He turned to look at her then, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Not the cold calculation she had grown accustomed to, but something that looked almost like relief. "More than they know," he whispered. "So many more than they know." That night marked the beginning of the most complex and dangerous therapeutic relationship in Sarah's career. She had no idea that she was about to become the keeper of secrets that would haunt her for the rest of her life, or that her compassion for a broken man would lead her down a path from which there might be no return. What started as professional curiosity was about to become something much darker and more complicated. And Marcus Webb, the man who had never trusted anyone, was about to place his faith in the one person who saw him as human rather than monster. You need to understand something about psychiatric nurses that most people don't realize. We're not just medical professionals dispensing medications and monitoring vital signs. We become the keepers of secrets, the holders of confessions that would destroy lives if they ever saw daylight. And sometimes we form connections with our patients that go far beyond what any textbook or training manual could prepare us for. Sarah's relationship with Marcus Webb began to evolve in ways that should have sent up every red flag in her professional training. But there was something about his vulnerability the glimpses of humanity she saw beneath his carefully constructed facade that made her believe she could be the key to his rehabilitation. The conversations that took place during those late-night encounters became the foundation of a therapeutic alliance that Dr. Reeves would later describe as either groundbreaking or catastrophic, depending on your perspective. Sarah began to see patterns in Marcus's behavior that other staff members had missed. His withdrawal wasn't just antisocial behavior, it was shame. His silence wasn't defiance, it was self-protection. "Tell me about your childhood," Sarah said during one of their unofficial sessions. She had learned to approach Marcus carefully, never pushing too hard, always letting him control the pace of their conversations. Marcus smiled that unsettling smile that had become familiar to her. "Are you trying to find the moment I became a monster, Nurse Chen? The traumatic event that broke my brain and turned me into a killer?" "I'm trying to understand you as a person," Sarah replied. "Everyone has a story. Everyone has experiences that shaped who they became. Even serial killers," Marcus asked, his tone mocking but his eyes serious. "Especially serial killers," Sarah said without hesitation. That answer seemed to surprise Marcus. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "You really believe that, don't you? You actually think there's something worth understanding about someone like me?" "I think you're more than the worst thing you've ever done," Sarah said. "I think you're a human being who made terrible choices, but who still has the capacity for remorse, for growth, for change." Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft that Sarah had to lean forward to hear him. "My childhood was perfectly normal," he said. "Loving parents, middle-class suburban home, good schools, no abuse, no trauma, no excuse for what I became. That's what makes it so much worse, isn't it? If I had been beaten or molested or neglected, people could point to that and say, that's why he turned out this way. But I had every advantage, every opportunity to become a good person, and I chose evil instead." Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. This wasn't the cold, calculating psychopath described in his file. This was a man wrestling with genuine remorse, struggling to understand his own darkness. "When did you first know?" she asked. "When did you first realize you were different?" Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked younger, almost vulnerable. "I was 7 years old," he said. "I found an injured bird in our backyard. My mother told me to bring it inside so we could take care of it, nurse it back to health. But as I held that little creature in my hands, feeling its tiny heart beating against my palm, I felt this overwhelming urge to squeeze, to feel the moment when the life left its body." Sarah forced herself to remain calm, to show no judgment in her expression. "Did you hurt the bird?" "I saved it," Marcus said, opening his eyes to look at her. "I fought against that urge with everything I had, and I saved that damn bird. My mother was so proud of me. She told everyone about her compassionate little boy who rescued the injured sparrow. But the urge didn't go away," Sarah said. "It got stronger," Marcus confirmed. "Every year, every month, every day, I fought it for 23 years. Do you have any idea what it's like to live with thoughts like that? To wake up every morning knowing that your natural instinct is to destroy, to hurt, to take life." Sarah reached across the table and did something that violated every protocol in her training. She placed her hand over Marcus's, offering human comfort to a man who had taken 17 lives. "You fought it for 23 years, she said. "That means you were a hero for 23 years. Marcus stared at their joined hands as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. When was the last time someone had voluntarily touched him? When was the last time someone had shown him kindness without fear? And then I stopped fighting, he whispered. I gave in. I became the monster I had always been afraid of becoming. What changed? Sarah asked. What happened that made you stop fighting? Marcus pulled his hand away from hers, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had come. That's enough for tonight, he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone. I've probably said too much already. But Sarah could see that something fundamental had shifted between them. Marcus had shown her a piece of his true self, the part that existed beneath the killer's mask. And she had responded with compassion instead of revulsion, with understanding instead of judgment. Over the following weeks, their conversations became deeper, more revealing. Marcus began to open up about his crimes in ways that he never had during his police interrogations or psychological evaluations. He described the overwhelming guilt that consumed him after each killing, the periods of depression and self-loathing that followed his violent episodes. They think I'm a textbook psychopath, Marcus told her one night. No empathy, no remorse, no conscience, but they're wrong. I feel everything, every scream, every tear, every moment of terror I caused. It's all here, he tapped his chest, burning like acid, eating me alive from the inside. Sarah began to see Marcus's case from a completely different perspective. What if he wasn't a psychopath at all? What if he was someone with severe impulse control issues, someone who had been fighting his own nature for decades before finally succumbing to urges he couldn't control? She started researching similar cases, reading about individuals who had committed violent crimes while experiencing what some researchers called ego-dystonic homicidal ideation, essentially people who were horrified by their own violent thoughts but unable to control them. But it was during their 7th week of regular conversations that Marcus revealed something that would change everything. Sarah thought she knew about his case. The police got it wrong, he said suddenly, in the middle of what had been a routine discussion about his medications. The timeline, the victims, the method. They got almost everything wrong. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What do you mean? Marcus looked around the empty common area, making sure they were truly alone before continuing. They charged me with 4 murders, he said. Jessica Morrison, David Chen, Susan Walsh, and Timothy Brooks. But Jessica Morrison was my first victim, not my 4th. And David Chen wasn't even one of mine. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. If Marcus was telling the truth, it meant that the police had missed at least one real victim while incorrectly attributing another murder to him. Marcus, she said carefully, if what you're saying is true, there's still a killer out there who murdered David Chen. Not still, Marcus replied. David Chen's killer died 3 years ago in a car accident. I read about it in the newspaper. Justice served itself, I suppose. Sarah's mind raced. If Marcus was innocent of David Chen's murder, it could potentially affect his sentencing, his placement in the facility, maybe even his entire case. Why didn't you tell anyone this during your trial? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Who would have believed me? A confessed serial killer claiming innocence on one count while admitting to others. My lawyer advised me to take the plea deal and be grateful they weren't seeking the death penalty. But there might be evidence, Sarah said. DNA, forensics. Something that could prove your innocence in that case. Sarah, Marcus said, using her first name for the first time. I appreciate what you're trying to do. But clearing my name on one murder doesn't change the fact that I killed the others. It doesn't make me less of a monster. But Sarah couldn't let it go. The idea that an innocent man might be imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit went against everything she believed in. She began to research David Chen's case, looking for inconsistencies, for evidence that might support Marcus's claim. What she found disturbed her more than she expected. David Chen had been found in his apartment, beaten to death with a baseball bat. The crime scene was chaotic, disorganized, suggesting a crime of passion rather than the methodical approach that characterized Marcus's other murders. Moreover, the forensic timeline put David Chen's death on a date when Marcus could prove he was 3 states away, attending his grandmother's funeral. The police had relied heavily on a witness who claimed to have seen Marcus near David's apartment, but that witness had later been arrested for perjury in an unrelated case. The more Sarah investigated, the more convinced she became that Marcus was telling the truth about David Chen. But her growing certainty about his innocence in that case only made her more aware of his guilt in the others. It was during their 10th week of conversations that Marcus made the revelation that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. "There are 7 more," he said without preamble, as if he had been building up the courage to say these words for months. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. 7 more what? 7 more victims. 7 families who still don't know what happened to their loved ones. 7 people whose bodies were never found. The common area suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sarah struggled to breathe as the implications of Marcus's words sank in. "Marcus," she whispered, "you're telling me that you killed 11 people, not 4. 11 that I'm sure of," Marcus replied. "There might be others. The years between my first kill and when I was caught are somewhat blurry. I was drinking heavily, using drugs to try to quiet the urges. Some of those nights are lost to me." Sarah felt sick. She had been thinking of Marcus as someone who could be rehabilitated, someone whose actions were the result of mental illness rather than pure evil. But 11 victims, possibly more. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, reversing their positions from that first night when she had comforted him. "Because you're the first person who ever saw me as human," he said. "Because you listened without judging, cared without fear. Because you made me remember what it felt like to have a conscience. Marcus, I have to report this. Those families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones." "I know," Marcus said calmly. "That's why I'm telling you. But I need you to understand something first. The information I have about those 7 victims, the location of their bodies, the details of what happened to them, I'm only going to share that with you. Not with the police, not with the FBI, not with Dr. Reeves. Only with you." Sarah stared at him, beginning to understand the impossible position he was putting her in. "You're asking me to become your accomplice," she said. "I'm asking you to help me do the right thing for the first time in my adult life," Marcus replied. "Those families deserve closure. But I need to know that I can trust you completely. I need to know that you won't abandon me the moment you get what you want." As Sarah sat in that sterile common area, holding hands with a man who had just confessed to 11 murders, she realized that she had reached a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She could walk away, report what Marcus had told her, and let the authorities handle the situation. Or she could stay, continue building the relationship that had taken months to establish, and potentially learn the location of 7 missing bodies. The choice she made in that moment would determine whether 7 families finally got the closure they had been seeking for years, or whether those secrets would die with Marcus Webb. But it would also determine whether Sarah Chen remained a psychiatric nurse committed to healing, or became something else entirely. The weight of 11 victims' lives pressed down on her shoulders as she realized that Marcus Webb hadn't just confessed to her. He had made her an offer that was both a gift and a curse, a chance to bring peace to grieving families, and a burden that might destroy her in the process. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah whispered, though she was already afraid she knew the answer. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, his smile looked genuinely warm. "I'm asking you to help me keep a promise I made to myself in this very room 3 years ago," he said. "I promised that someday, somehow, I would find a way to tell those families where their loved ones are resting. You, Sarah Chen, are my someday. Have you ever made a decision that you knew would change everything about who you are? I'm not talking about career changes or moving to a new city. I'm talking about the kind of choice that splits your life into before and after, the moment when you cross a line that can never be uncrossed." Sarah Chen sat in silence for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall showed that only minutes had passed since Marcus's revelation. Around them, the psychiatric ward continued its nocturnal routine. Security guards made their rounds, checking on sleeping patients. Night shift nurses administered medications and updated charts. The world kept turning, oblivious to the fact that everything had just fundamentally changed. "I need time to think," Sarah finally said, her voice barely steady. Marcus nodded, understanding flickering in his pale eyes. "Of course, this isn't a decision to make lightly. But Sarah, you need to understand something. Time isn't unlimited here." "What do you mean?" Marcus glanced around the empty common area, then leaned closer, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. "I've been having chest pains for the past 3 weeks. Shortness of breath, irregular heartbeat, pain radiating down my left arm. I haven't reported it to the medical staff." Sarah felt ice form in her veins. "Marcus, those are symptoms of cardiac issues. You need to be evaluated immediately. My father died of a heart attack at 42. Marcus continued, ignoring her medical concerns. "My grandfather at 38. Bad genetics, Sarah. Very bad genetics. And 3 years of carrying the weight of 11 murders hasn't exactly been good for my cardiovascular health." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Marcus died, the locations of 7 victims would die with him. 7 families would never get closure. 7 sets of parents, siblings, children would spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their loved ones. "You're manipulating me," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm being honest with you," Marcus replied. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm being completely honest with another human being. Yes, I want something from you, but I'm also offering something in return. Information that could bring peace to people who have been living in hell for years." Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that Marcus so often stared out of. The parking lot below was empty, except for a few cars belonging to night shift staff. Beyond that, the lights of the city stretched into the distance, each one representing thousands of people living their normal lives, unaware of the impossible decision being made in this sterile room. "If I agree to this," Sarah said, not turning around, "what exactly would you expect from me?" "Time," Marcus said simply. "Trust. The chance to tell you things I've never told anyone else. The location of the bodies is just the beginning, Sarah. I can give you details about each case that would help the families understand what happened. I can tell you about evidence that was never found, about mistakes the police made in their investigations. I can give you closure that goes far beyond just finding remains." Sarah turned back to face him. "And in return, you continue to see me as human. You don't abandon me once you get what you want. You help me find some small measure of redemption before I die." The word redemption hung in the air between them. Sarah had spent her entire career believing that everyone deserved a chance at redemption, that no one was beyond the possibility of change. But she had never faced a test of that belief quite like this. "How do I know you're telling the truth about the victims?" How do I know this isn't some elaborate manipulation? Marcus was quiet for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. I wrote this 3 years ago, he said, placing it on the table between them. It contains the first name and last known location of one of the 7 victims. If you research it, you'll find a missing person report that matches. You'll find a family that's been looking for answers for 6 years. Sarah stared at the folded paper as if it were a venomous snake. Once she opened it, once she confirmed that Marcus was telling the truth, there would be no going back. She would be committed to a path that could destroy her career, her reputation, possibly her sanity. Sarah, Marcus said softly, I know what I'm asking of you is enormous. I know the position I'm putting you in. But think about this. In 3 years at this facility, I've never spoken to anyone the way I've spoken to you. I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you. That has to mean something. It could mean you're an exceptional manipulator, Sarah pointed out. It could, Marcus agreed. But it could also mean that you've accomplished something that dozens of psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers couldn't. You've reached the part of me that still remembers how to feel human. Against every instinct, every bit of professional training, every voice of reason in her head, Sarah reached for the piece of paper. Her hands were shaking as she unfolded it, revealing Marcus's careful handwriting. Rebecca Martinez, age 23, last seen leaving her job at the Pine Valley Mall on November 15, 2019. Check the missing person reports for San Antonio, Texas. Sarah felt her breath catch. The name was familiar. She had seen it mentioned in one of the true crime documentaries she sometimes watched during her off hours. Rebecca Martinez, a young woman who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a devastated family and no leads for police to follow. You killed her, Sarah whispered, though she already knew the answer. I did, Marcus confirmed. And I can tell you exactly where she is. I can tell you what happened to her, why it happened, how it happened. I can give her family answers they've been praying for 6 years. Sarah looked up from the paper to find Marcus watching her with an intensity that was both unsettling and oddly vulnerable. But I won't tell anyone else, he continued. Not the police, not the FBI, not Dr. Reeves. Only you, Sarah, because you're the only person who's ever seen me as anything other than a monster. The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical force. She thought about Rebecca Martinez's family, about the other 6 families who were still searching for their loved ones. She thought about the parents who went to bed every night not knowing if their children were alive or dead, about the siblings who jumped every time the phone rang, hoping for news that never came. But she also thought about her professional ethics, about the boundaries she was being asked to cross, about the dangerous game she was being invited to play with a man who had killed 11 people. I need to ask you something, Sarah said finally, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Marcus nodded. Do you feel remorse for what you did? Real remorse, not just regret about getting caught. Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Sarah saw something she had never seen before. Tears. Every day, he whispered. Every single day for the past 3 years, I've woken up thinking about them. Their names, their faces, their final moments. I dream about them, Sarah. I dream about what their lives might have been like if they had lived. Rebecca Martinez would be 29 now. She wanted to be a teacher. She had been saving money to go back to school. She would probably have had children by now, maybe been married to someone who loved her. The tears spilled over, running down Marcus's cheeks as he continued. I don't just remember killing them. I remember everything about them. Their hopes, their dreams, the things they said in their final moments. I carry all of that with me, every day, every hour. If that's not remorse, then I don't know what is. Sarah watched this man, this killer, cry for his victims, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. This wasn't the cold, calculated psychopath described in his file. This was a broken human being, carrying a weight that would crush most people. If I agree to this, Sarah said slowly, there have to be conditions. Marcus wiped his eyes and nodded. Anything. First, you get a full cardiac workup. If you're having heart problems, you need medical attention. I won't have your death on my conscience along with everything else. Agreed. Second, you tell me everything. Not just the locations of the bodies, but the details of each case. I want to understand what happened, why it happened, how it happened. If I'm going to help these families find closure, they deserve the complete truth. I can do that. And third, Sarah took a deep breath. If at any point I feel like you're manipulating me or lying to me, this ends immediately. I report everything to the authorities, and we never speak again. Marcus considered this for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But Sarah, I need something from you too. What? I need you to promise me that you won't abandon me once you get what you want. These conversations, this connection we've built, it's the only thing that's made me feel human in years. When this is over, when you've gotten the information you need, I need to know that you won't just disappear. Sarah looked into Marcus's eyes and saw the frightened child he must have been, the little boy who fought his dark urges for 23 years before finally succumbing to them. She saw the man who had spent 3 years in isolation, carrying the weight of 11 murders and the guilt of 7 families who would never get closure. I promise, she said, and meant it. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it looked completely genuine. Then we have a deal, he said. But before we begin, there's something else you need to know. Something about why I chose you specifically. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Your background, your history, your personal life. I know more about you than you might be comfortable with. How? Marcus's expression became almost apologetic. I've had 3 years to study the staff here, to learn their routines, their personalities, their vulnerabilities. I know that you grew up in foster care, that you became a nurse because you wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. I know that you've never been married, never had children, that you pour all of your maternal instincts into caring for your patients. Sarah felt violated, exposed in a way that made her skin crawl. You investigated me. I observed you, Marcus corrected, and I realized that you were the only person here who might understand what it feels like to be abandoned, to be seen as broken, to be written off by society. I chose you because I recognized a kindred spirit. I'm nothing like you, Sarah said sharply. Aren't you? Marcus asked quietly. We're both outcasts, Sarah. We're both people who have been hurt by the world and who have dedicated our lives to trying to fix things that can't be fixed. The only difference is that I stopped fighting my darkness, and you never have. As Sarah sat there, processing the full scope of what Marcus was revealing, she realized that she was no longer just a psychiatric nurse who had formed an unusual therapeutic relationship with a patient. She had become something else entirely. A confidant to a killer, a keeper of secrets that could bring closure to 7 families, a woman standing at the precipice of a decision that would define the rest of her life. The question was no longer whether she would help Marcus reveal the locations of his hidden victims. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle the truth about what she might discover about herself in the process. You know what they don't tell you about crossing ethical lines. It doesn't happen all at once, like jumping off a cliff. It happens gradually, one small compromise at a time, until you look back and realize you're standing somewhere you never thought you'd be. And by then you're so far from where you started that finding your way back seems impossible. Sarah's life changed the moment she agreed to Marcus's terms. What had started as professional curiosity had evolved into something much more complex and dangerous. She was no longer just treating a patient, she was collaborating with a serial killer to uncover secrets that law enforcement had failed to discover. The first step was getting Marcus the cardiac evaluation he needed. Sarah arranged for Dr. Williams, the facility's cardiologist, to examine him under the pretense of routine health screening for long-term patients. The results were worse than she had feared. Significant arterial blockage, Dr. Williams explained to Sarah after the examination. If this patient were in general population, I'd recommend immediate intervention, but given his status and the facility's protocols, we're looking at medication management and monitoring. What's his prognosis without surgical intervention? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. 6 months, maybe 8 if he's lucky. The stress of incarceration combined with his family history makes this a ticking time bomb. Sarah felt the weight of that timeline pressing down on her. 6 months to extract information about 7 victims, 6 months to bring closure to 7 families, 6 months to document everything Marcus knew before that knowledge died with him. But it was also 6 months of maintaining the most dangerous relationship of her professional career without anyone discovering what she was doing. Their first official session took place 3 days after Marcus's cardiac evaluation. Sarah had convinced Dr. Reeves to allow her to conduct one-on-one therapeutic sessions with Marcus, arguing that his recent openness represented a breakthrough that shouldn't be ignored. "I want to start with Rebecca Martinez," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from Marcus in the small therapy room. "Tell me everything." Marcus took a deep breath, his pale eyes focusing on something beyond the walls of the room. "I saw her first at the mall where she worked," he began, his voice taking on a detached, clinical tone. "She was behind the counter at a jewelry store, helping an elderly woman choose a gift for her granddaughter. She was patient, kind, genuinely interested in making sure the woman found something perfect." Sarah made notes as Marcus spoke, documenting every detail while trying to maintain professional detachment. "I watched her for 3 weeks," Marcus continued. "Learned her schedule, her habits, her routines. She always parked in the same section of the garage, always took the same route to her car. She was predictable, which made her vulnerable." "What made you choose her specifically?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled. "She reminded me of someone I used to know," he said finally. "A girl I went to high school with named Amy Chen. Amy was kind to me when no one else was, defended me when other kids made fun of my awkwardness. I had a crush on her for years, but I never told her. She died in a car accident our senior year." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The parallel between Amy Chen and Rebecca Martinez, between Marcus's idealized memory and his chosen victim, painted a disturbing picture of how his mind worked. "So you killed Rebecca because she reminded you of someone you cared about." "I killed Rebecca because I couldn't control the urge anymore," Marcus corrected. "But I chose her because she represented everything good that I had lost, everything innocent that I wanted to possess and destroy." The honesty was brutal, unflinching, and somehow more disturbing than if Marcus had tried to minimize his actions or blame external factors. "Where is she?" Sarah asked. Marcus gave her detailed directions to a wooded area 40 miles outside San Antonio, describing landmarks, distances, and the specific location where he had buried Rebecca's body. As he spoke, Sarah realized that he wasn't just confessing, he was providing a roadmap that would allow Rebecca's family to finally lay her to rest. But the information came with a cost. With each detail Marcus provided, Sarah felt herself becoming more complicit in his crimes. She was no longer just a nurse treating a patient. She was a co-conspirator in covering up information that should have been reported to authorities years ago. "Why didn't you ever consider confessing?" Sarah asked. "Why take the secret to your grave rather than give these families closure?" Marcus smiled, that unsettling smile that had become familiar to her. "Because confession without context is meaningless," he said. "If I had simply told police where the bodies were located, they would have treated it as just another piece of evidence to file away. But this way, through you, I can give these families something more valuable than just remains. I can give them understanding." Over the following weeks, their sessions became more intense, more detailed. Marcus revealed the locations of 3 more victims, along with disturbing insights into his methodology and psychology. He described how he chose victims, how he gained their trust, how he disposed of evidence. But he also revealed unexpected details that showed a different side of his nature. He had left flowers at one victim's makeshift grave every year on the anniversary of her death. He had donated money anonymously to search efforts for another victim. He had kept detailed journals documenting his remorse and self-hatred in the years following each murder. "You're not what I expected," Sarah admitted during their 5th session. "What did you expect?" "A monster," Sarah said honestly. "Someone without conscience, without capacity for remorse. Someone who killed for pleasure and never looked back." Marcus nodded slowly. "That would be easier, wouldn't it? If I were just a textbook psychopath, you could catalog my information and move on without worrying about my humanity. But the truth is more complicated. The truth is that you're a human being who committed monstrous acts," Sarah said. "Exactly. And that's what makes this so difficult for both of us. You can't completely hate me because you see my remorse, my pain, my genuine desire to make amends. And I can't completely hate myself because you see something in me worth redeeming." As their relationship deepened, Sarah began to notice changes in herself that disturbed her. She found herself thinking about Marcus during her off hours, wondering how he was feeling, whether he was having chest pains, whether he was sleeping well. She caught herself making excuses to walk past his unit during times when she wasn't officially scheduled to be there. Most troubling of all, she realized that she was beginning to care about Marcus as a person, not just as a patient or a source of information. His vulnerability, his genuine remorse, his obvious gratitude for her compassion had created an emotional bond that went far beyond professional boundaries. It was during their 7th session that Marcus revealed something that would change everything. Sarah thought she understood about their relationship. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of anxiety. "Something about why I really chose you for this." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age and worn from handling. He placed it on the table between them with trembling hands. The photograph showed a young Asian woman, perhaps in her early 20s, smiling at the camera. She was wearing a nurse's uniform and standing in front of what appeared to be a hospital. "This is Lily Chen," Marcus said quietly. "She was a pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in 1987. She was also my first intended victim." Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what Marcus was telling her. "I planned to kill her for 3 months," Marcus continued. I learned her schedule, her routines, her habits. I followed her home from work, figured out where she lived, how she lived. I was going to make her my first kill. "What stopped you?" Sarah whispered. "She helped me," Marcus said simply. "I had gone to the hospital emergency room after a panic attack. I was 21, terrified, convinced that I was losing my mind. The doctor wanted to admit me for psychiatric evaluation, but I was too afraid to stay. Lily Chen was the nurse who processed my discharge paperwork." Marcus picked up the photograph, staring at the young woman's face with an expression of profound sadness. She saw how scared I was. She took the time to talk to me, to reassure me that having anxiety didn't make me crazy. She gave me information about mental health resources, support groups, therapists who specialized in helping young adults. She treated me with kindness when I felt like a monster. "So you didn't kill her?" "I couldn't," Marcus confirmed. "For the first time in my life, someone had shown me genuine compassion when I was at my most vulnerable. I realized that killing her would be destroying the very thing I was desperate to find in the world: human kindness." Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her mind. "Chen, that's why you were so interested in me from the beginning. My last name." Marcus nodded. "When I saw your name on my case file, when I realized there was a nurse named Chen assigned to my care, I wondered if it was some kind of sign. When I met you, when I saw the same compassion in your eyes that I had seen in Lily's all those years ago, I knew I had been given a second chance." "A second chance for what?" "To be saved," Marcus said simply. "Lily Chen saved me from becoming a killer in 1987, but I was too weak to hold on to that salvation. I let the darkness win eventually. But you, Sarah Chen, you've given me the chance to find redemption before I die." As Sarah sat there, looking at the photograph of a woman who had unknowingly prevented a serial killer's first murder, she realized that her connection to Marcus went deeper than she had ever imagined. She wasn't just treating a patient or extracting information from a killer. She was completing a circle that had been drawn 37 years ago by another nurse with the same last name, the same compassionate instincts, the same willingness to see humanity in someone others had written off. But she was also faced with a disturbing question. Was Marcus genuinely seeking redemption, or was he manipulating her through an elaborate story designed to appeal to her professional instincts and ethnic identity? The photograph of Lily Chen stared up at her from the table, a reminder that sometimes the line between salvation and manipulation is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And Sarah Chen, psychiatric nurse, keeper of secrets, and unwitting participant in a decades-old story of missed opportunities and second chances, had to decide whether to trust the most dangerous patient she had ever encountered. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward an uncertain future, each second bringing Marcus closer to his inevitable death, and Sarah closer to a revelation that would force her to confront the darkest corners of the human heart, including her own. What happens when you realize that everything you thought you knew about yourself was wrong? That the person you believed yourself to be was just a carefully constructed facade hiding something much darker underneath? That's the question Sarah Chen would be forced to confront in the final chapter of her relationship with Marcus Webb. 2 months had passed since their arrangement began. Marcus had revealed the locations of 6 of the 7 remaining victims, providing detailed information that Sarah had carefully documented but not yet shared with authorities. Each session brought new revelations, new insights into the mind of a killer who defied every stereotype she had ever encountered. But it also brought Sarah face to face with uncomfortable truths about herself. She had started visiting Marcus outside of their scheduled sessions, telling herself it was necessary to maintain the therapeutic relationship. She had begun bringing him small gifts, books, magazines, better quality coffee than the institutional brew served in the common area. She told herself these were tools to build rapport, incentives to keep him talking. But late at night, alone in her apartment, Sarah was forced to acknowledge a truth that terrified her more than anything Marcus had ever told her. She was developing feelings for him that went far beyond professional concern. It wasn't romantic love, exactly, though there were elements of that disturbing her sleep. It was something deeper and more complex, a sense of connection with someone who understood darkness in a way that no one else in her life ever could or would. Sarah had spent her entire career helping broken people, but she had never encountered someone whose brokenness so perfectly complemented her own hidden fractures. Marcus saw through her professional competence to the lonely, damaged woman underneath. And instead of being repulsed by what he found there, he seemed to understand it, to accept it, to value it in a way that made Sarah feel truly seen for the first time in her adult life. It was during their 15th session that Marcus made the revelation that would shatter everything Sarah thought she understood about their relationship and about herself. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said, his pale eyes more serious than she had ever seen them. "Something about the last victim. The seventh one." Sarah pulled out her notebook, preparing to document another location, another family's opportunity for closure. Her name was Jennifer Huang. Marcus continued. She was a social worker, 28 years old, specializing in cases involving mentally ill offenders. She had been advocating for better treatment of patients in facilities like this one. Sarah wrote down the details, but something about Marcus's tone made her look up from her notes. "Where is she?" Sarah asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded carefully in his lap. "I didn't kill Jennifer Huang," he said finally. Sarah felt confusion wash over her. "What do you mean? You said there were 7 victims whose bodies were never found." "There were," Marcus confirmed. "But Jennifer Huang wasn't one of my victims. She was supposed to be, but something stopped me." "What stopped you?" Marcus reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in his, a gesture that had become familiar over their months of sessions. "You did," he said simply. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "That's impossible. I never met Jennifer Huang. I've never even heard of her until now." "Not directly," Marcus said. "But 3 years ago, just before I was transferred to this facility, Jennifer Huang came to see me. She was researching conditions in psychiatric facilities for mentally ill offenders. She wanted to interview me about my treatment, my mental health care, my experiences in the system." Sarah's hands were shaking now, though she couldn't understand why. During that interview, Marcus continued, Jennifer mentioned another psychiatric nurse she had spoken with, someone who had impressed her with their compassion and dedication to patient care, someone who had told her that even the most dangerous patients deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. "Marcus, what are you saying?" "She mentioned you by name, Sarah. She told me about a conversation she had with Sarah Chen, a psychiatric nurse at Millbrook, who believed that everyone had the capacity for redemption. She quoted something you had said. Every patient is someone's child, someone's loved one. Behind every crime is a human being who is suffering." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as fragments of memory came flooding back. A young social worker who had interviewed her 3 years ago about patient care practices. A woman who had been passionate about reform, about treating mentally ill offenders with compassion rather than just warehousing them. "I remember her," Sarah whispered. "When Jennifer left my interview that day, she told me she was going to use my case as part of her research. She was going to advocate for better therapeutic programs, for more nurses like Sarah Chen who saw patients as human beings rather than monsters." Marcus's grip on Sarah's hands tightened. That night I followed her home. I planned to make her my next victim. But as I watched her through her apartment window, I saw her working on her research. I saw pages and pages of notes about improving conditions for people like me. I saw your name mentioned over and over again as an example of what psychiatric care should look like. Sarah couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning around her. I couldn't kill her, Marcus continued. Not when she was trying to help people like me. Not when she was inspired by someone who had shown me the first genuine kindness I had experienced in years. So I walked away. But you said she was one of the 7 missing victims. She is, Marcus said grimly. 3 days later, Jennifer Huang was murdered by someone else. A robbery gone wrong, according to police. But I knew better. I had been watching her, learning her routines. I knew she never carried cash, never wore jewelry, never owned anything worth stealing. Sarah stared at Marcus in horror. You think someone else killed her because of her research? I think someone didn't want her asking questions about how mentally ill offenders are treated in state facilities. I think her advocacy work made her dangerous to people who profit from the current system. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Marcus was telling the truth, then Jennifer Huang had been killed because she was trying to reform a system that Sarah worked within every day. She had been murdered for advocating for the kind of compassionate care that Sarah provided. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Marcus released her hands and leaned back in his chair. Because you need to understand what you've gotten yourself into, he said. Because you need to know that the information I've given you about the other 6 victims isn't just about bringing closure to their families. It's about exposing a pattern of violence and corruption that goes far beyond one serial killer. What pattern? 3 of my victims were social workers or advocates who were asking uncomfortable questions about the treatment of mentally ill offenders. 2 others were journalists investigating corruption in state psychiatric facilities. The 6th was a family member of a patient who died under suspicious circumstances. Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. You're saying you didn't choose your victims randomly. I'm saying my victims were chosen for me, Marcus replied. Not consciously, not explicitly, but I was guided toward people who posed threats to a system that certain individuals wanted to protect. Guided by whom? Marcus smiled, that unsettling smile that no longer seemed cold to Sarah, but infinitely sad. That's what you're going to help me figure out, he said. Because the same people who influenced my choice of victims are going to be very interested in what you've learned during our sessions, and they're going to want to make sure that information never sees the light of day. As Sarah sat there, processing the full scope of what Marcus was revealing, she realized that their relationship had never been about redemption or closure or even manipulation. It had been about uncovering a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the mental health system she had dedicated her life to serving. Sarah, Marcus said gently, you asked me once if I felt genuine remorse for my crimes. The answer is yes, more than you can possibly imagine. But I also need you to understand that my crimes were just the tip of an iceberg that goes much deeper than anyone realizes. How deep? Deep enough that a social worker who quoted your compassionate philosophy was murdered to keep her quiet. Deep enough that you're now in possession of information that certain people would kill to suppress. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that Marcus had stared out of so many times during their conversations. You're telling me that I'm in danger because I've been trying to help families find closure. I'm telling you that you're in danger because you've uncovered evidence of systematic corruption and murder, Marcus corrected. The locations of my victims' bodies are just the beginning. Each site contains evidence that will expose a network of people who have been using mentally ill offenders as weapons while profiting from their incarceration. Sarah turned back to face Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since their relationship began. This was never about redemption, was it? This was about using me to expose whatever conspiracy you think you've uncovered. Marcus met her gaze steadily. It was about both, he said. I genuinely do want those families to find peace. I genuinely do feel remorse for what I've done. But I also want to make sure that the people who turned me into a weapon don't do the same thing to anyone else. And if I refuse to help you expose this conspiracy, if I just report the locations of the bodies and walk away, Marcus's expression became infinitely sad. Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if Jennifer Huang died because she tried to implement the kind of compassionate care you believe in. You'll wonder if other advocates are being silenced while you stand by and do nothing. The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical force. She had entered into this relationship believing she was helping a broken man find redemption while bringing closure to grieving families. Now she was being asked to expose a conspiracy that could cost her everything she had worked for, and possibly her life. But as she looked at Marcus Webb, serial killer, mentally ill offender, and possibly the only person who could help her uncover a truth that needed to be exposed, Sarah realized that she had already made her choice months ago. She had made it the moment she decided to see him as human rather than monster. She had made it every time she chose compassion over protocol, understanding over judgment. She had made it when she allowed herself to care about someone that society had written off as irredeemable. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, his smile looked like hope. "Help me keep the promise I made to myself 3 years ago," he said. "Help me make sure that no one else has to go through what I went through. Help me turn my crimes into something that might actually save lives instead of just ending them." As Sarah Chen, psychiatric nurse, keeper of secrets, and unwitting participant in a conspiracy that reached into the darkest corners of the mental health system, sat down to plan the exposure of a truth that certain people would kill to suppress, she realized that her choice to see humanity in a serial killer had led her to discover something far more dangerous than anything Marcus Webb had ever done. She had discovered that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones behind bars. Sometimes they're the ones who put them there. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., preparing to testify before a grand jury investigating corruption in state mental health facilities. The information provided by Marcus Webb had led to the discovery of a network of officials who had been deliberately placing vulnerable mentally ill individuals in situations designed to trigger violent episodes. The conspiracy was more extensive than even Marcus had suspected. Pharmaceutical companies testing experimental drugs on patients without consent. Private contractors billing for services never provided. Officials deliberately destabilizing patients to justify longer incarcerations and higher profits. 7 families had finally been able to bury their loved ones, but more importantly, dozens of mentally ill offenders had been removed from situations designed to exploit their vulnerabilities. Marcus Webb had died 3 weeks after their final session, his weak heart finally giving out as he slept. But he had lived long enough to see the beginning of the investigation that would expose the system that had used him as a weapon. In his final letter to Sarah, he had written, "You saw me as human when I couldn't see it myself. You helped me find redemption, not through forgiveness but through purpose. Thank you for helping me turn my darkness into light." Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer, A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is choose to see humanity in someone that society has declared inhuman. But sometimes, that choice is also the most important thing you can do. She had learned that compassion is not weakness, it's not naivety. Sometimes, compassion is the most powerful weapon against systems designed to dehumanize and exploit the vulnerable. And sometimes, the most broken people are the ones who can help you fix a broken world. As Sarah walked into that courtroom to testify about the secrets she had uncovered in the sterile common area of a psychiatric facility, she carried with her the words that Marcus Webb had taught her to understand in a new way. Every patient is someone's child, someone's loved one. Behind every crime is a human being who is suffering. And sometimes, that suffering can be transformed into something that heals rather than harms. But only if someone is willing to risk everything to see the humanity that others refuse to acknowledge. What would you have done in Sarah's place? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will challenge everything you think you know about justice, redemption, and the thin line between good and evil.